Sonya Sharp is running as part of the community's first party. She's also the outgoing councillor for Ward 1, and we've connected with her this morning via Zoom. Good morning, Sonya.
Good morning.
Thank you for speaking with us. So,
Of course.
make your pitch. Why should you be Calgary's next mayor?
I am ready to be Calgary's next mayor to create an affordable, safe city that works and where people can trust City Hall again, because trust is broken.
Do you hear that at the door, that people don't trust City Hall?
We hear it at the door. We've heard it through surveys. I was part of the most unliked council in history, so that hurts a bit. And so regaining that trust is really critical to moving the city forward, because if you don't trust your elected officials to have your back, nothing's going to get done. So trust is really critical at this point.
Okay, well, let's get into some of the policy, but I want to, weave that trust through it, I suppose.
Yeah.
You would repeal blanket zoning. Various mayoral candidates have staked out specific positions, but it's not just repeal or keep it in place. Everybody's got to take about sort of then what. So explain what you want to do.
So I think what's important is kind of a three-step process here to blanket rezoning and the repealing of it. So first thing you do is you have a regular meeting of council and you repeal what was, and then you reinstate prior to that public hearing, of making sure parcels of land go back to what they were. And so then you look at the process and you look at cutting the red tape. In 2023, before blanket rezoning even came to council for public hearing, part of the housing strategy, I brought a notice of motion forward that failed at committee. And it talked about the ways you can reduce red tape without taking people from the process. And that's what really drove that wedge through blanket rezoning in the public hearing. So, repeal, reinstate, reform, and cut red tape. And, it is interesting that I hear some of my opponents talk about blanket rezoning, and those that came to speak for it and now all of a sudden want to repeal it. And Jody's been very consistent. She obviously supported it. And then we have, ex-councillor Farkas, saying that he wants to repeal it, but kind of put his own spin on what this could be. My team, my Community's First team, and I have been very clear. We signed a repeal guarantee. We're repealing it. And what that process looks like after is going to have to be very thoughtful and making sure that, we're mitigating any lawsuits or things like that. So there's a lot of ways that people think they can do this, but there's going to be one way to do it.
Now, we were chatting before we went to air here this morning, and I was saying, what are you hearing at the door? And you said number one was public safety. Now, you've made a campaign commitment to hire 500 more police officers to address people's safety concerns.
Yeah.
What is the practicality? I mean, how quickly can you get those officers on the ground, and what's the costing of that?
So what we expect to see is that the chief and commission will come to budget in November with some sort of business case, game plan, timeline. And really it's going to be up to them to set the tone on how quickly we can find those officers. And with the cost of that, you think about, let's say it's $150,000 per officer, and you can save $2.5 million just in the CAO office. We spent $285 million in climate. Those are that you think to yourself, how much can you use that money to get a police officer? And then also the capital cost to building a new station. And I think the challenge of what people understand about what 500 new police officers can do to the city is just get it up to the national average. But you think how safe you will feel in your streets. You think how safe you'll feel on the train going to school or appointments. You think how safe you'll feel going to events like, Folk Fest or going down to the Confluence. These are real things that will impact people and their safety. And I'm actually hearing this across the city. Some places, you'll hear about blanket rezoning a little bit more, but public safety is paramount right now in the city on how people feel about living in Calgary. And if you don't have a safe city, it is going to be difficult to draw in investment, people to stay here, and your loved ones to want to continue living here, and your kids to stay here for school. So it's top of mind for everybody. And so we've pledged. We were recently endorsed by the Calgary Police Association. Yeah. They believe in our pledge, and so now it's going to be up to the commission and police Chief, to bring something forward so we can look at a business case.
Why'd you pick on and I ask this with respect, why'd you pick on the chief administrative officer's budget or office and the city's climate measures to save the money?
Yeah, I would say those are just things that I brought forward. So they're tangible costs. This is not new. I'm not really picking on people or anything, but I'm saying in a budget last year, I brought over 11 amendments. One of them was to kind of skirt the costs in city bureaucrat, like top layer. That's 2.5 million in operating. I asked for an audit of the climate emergency. We know that we've spent $285 million at this point. I've also asked for an audit of the reorg. That actually failed as well. And so, it would be really important to understand where you could find cost measures. Those are all coming back once I'm elected, because we need to understand where we can find efficiencies. Now, those are just two examples. There are a lot of other, I would say, spending lines, and we hope that once we're elected, Communities First and we can bring finance and corporate services back so that we can have a senior administration come to committee with an open book, look at their line items and say, these are things that right now Calgarians aren't focused on. Could this be paused? And these are critical things that we need to think about, because spending can be erratic without us knowing. And council only sees pieces of a budget. I worked there for a very long time. I know what council gets to see. And so we kind of have to, shed a little bit more light on the transparency of the budget, because we're accountable to Calgarians.
This is I want to get into this point. I mean, you've got this to-do list, and one of the three priorities in your campaign literature for your mayoral run is to bring senior administration to heel. Explain what that means. Like, what's an example from your time on council or as a bureaucrat when city staff ran the show over council?
I will say, when I was at City Hall as an employee, compared to what I've seen the last 4 years, there's been a shift. When I was a city employee, we respected council. They led the way. They had control over policy. There has been a lot of things the last 4 years that I've seen administration bring forward, and I think to myself, where is this even coming from? Is there one member of council? Well, I'll give you an example. On the budget preview, the last week of council, there were policies that needed to be included in the budget. They were not included in the budget. And it was something in Ward 1 and something in Ward 2. And we sent a signal to industry that, we didn't want these things in the budget. And myself and Councillor Chabot stood up and asked about a $40 million ask that went towards some downtown initiatives. And the question was, who put this in the budget? And confidently, they stood up and said, we did. That's not how this works. And so we need to be setting the tone. And I look at the organization, and I've said this before, I've said this many times, the org chart needs to be flipped upside down. The most important people at City Hall are the ones that deliver the core services and public services frontline facing employees. And we need to look at the way the governance structure at this point is reporting to council. And so I talk about senior administration, I talk about, the top layer. That's really what I'm talking about here. People won't understand if I get into the details too much, but the most important people are the ones delivering the core services. And actually, Home Depot has their org chart flipped upside down. And there's a reason for that. You're delivering service, and you're a public servant. I'm a public servant. And so I think it's really important, council lead by example, but council also has to take over what's been going on. Administration and senior administration reports to council, and you, the constituent citizen, we report to you.
Yeah.
And if we don't do a good job, our shelf life expires. So there needs to be a change. And I look at some of these aspirational things that some of my opponents are saying. Until you get control of a governance structure, nothing is going to happen.
All right, we're really tight for time, but I want to get to this. I mean, you're running as part of a political party, Communities First. Yes. And I've stood at the library and talked to people, what are your main issues? And some people said, I cannot vote for somebody who's running for a party. How much pressure will there be for you to vote as a party? And what are you hearing about that at the door?
I think there's a big confusion thinking that we're aligned with some, political flag, or we're aligned with NDP or UCP. That's not true. We're like-minded individuals that, obviously see the same things, and we agree on the same to-do list, but really what it comes down to is working as a team. And so once Calgarians understand that, that's important. And there's no party whip. We're not bound by any sort of party structure, and we have to follow the bill and MGA. And I believe we need to dissolve for 2 years before we can even do this again. So there's things that are going to change, and the role of the mayor is really to bring 14 people together. So there are wards that are not in Communities First, and my job will be to bring everybody together and make sure that we're delivering what we need to for Calgarians. And
You feel ready to bring 14 people together after being part of the least trusted, least popular council, as you described?
I sure
it?
do.
You do.
I sure do. Yeah, and I say that with confidence. And what I'll also say is I have incumbents that are supporting me to run for mayor, and that's a really big honor. They've looked at me and said, "Can you please be our mayor?" And then I've built a team with 9 other individuals, and they are all very different from each other, but we all care about this city, and we're ready to deliver what needs to be done for Calgarians. And
Very
it sounds
good.
cliche, but we're all leaders in our own way.
All right. We will leave it there for time. I
Thank you.
really appreciate you speaking with us this morning. Thank you.